Under pounding rain, corrupt cop Victor Kane stopped Navy SEALs Ethan Ward and Marcus Hale, cuffing them on a false weapons charge. Hours later, they faced a courtroom built on lies while Kane worked to cover a secret arms deal. Ethan must stay calm and prove their innocence before the truth is buried for good. But what happens when Admiral Jonathan Reeves suddenly steps into the courtroom with explosive evidence that could destroy Kane's plan? If this fight for justice moves you, like and share this story to let more people witness how it all unfolds next. I was there the night the rain came down, like a steady whisper over Wilmington. Not a storm, just that thin coastal drizzle that turns every streetlight into a blurred halo. The sidewalks gleamed like they'd been freshly varnished. I just left the memorial at the VFW hall, where we'd said a few quiet words for a sailor who never made it home. The kind of gathering where folks speak softly and shake hands a little longer than usual. That's when I saw their truck, two men inside, shoulders squared even at rest. I recognized the look before I knew their names, Navy. The driver had a stillness to him, a practiced calm, the sort of calm you only earn the hard way. Later I'd learned he was Ethan Ward, 34 tall, clean lines to his posture, a faint scar riding his left cheek like a pale thread. The passenger was Marcus Hale, 32, heavier in the chest, a charge under the skin, like he was trying to outrun old echoes. They turned off Market onto a side street where the city thins into low houses and empty lots. Then the night tore open. A cruiser screamed past me and cut hard across their lane, fishtailing a slick arc of spray. Red and blue flashed so bright the rain seemed to stutter midair. The police SUV skidded to a stop, nose to nose with their truck. Doors slammed. Out stepped Victor Kane, a big man broad through the shoulders, gray eyes that didn't blink. He didn't stroll. He advanced, rain freckling his jacket, one hand already moving toward the cuffs like the whole scene had been decided 10 minutes ago. Out of the truck, he said. No preamble, no how do you do. His voice could have cut glass. Step out, both of you. Now. The word now hit like a baton. Marcus pushed his door first and came out half a stride hot. On what grounds? The question wasn't sarcasm. It was challenge, clean up right, the kind of challenge a man uses when he knows his weight. The driver's door opened slower. Ethan stepped down with the quiet of someone who's done this dance in worse places for worse reasons. He didn't raise his hands high, just a calm show of palms. He slid a hand to Marcus's shoulder and gave the lightest pressure, the kind you'd miss if you weren't looking. Not here, Ethan said. Not like this. 5 words and they changed the air. The street seemed to exhale. Kane didn't. He planted his boots and spoke like a man reading instructions he'd rehearsed. Failure to comply with a lawful stop, he said, and reasonable suspicion of trafficking firearms. He flicked a glance at the truck bed like the tires themselves might confess. Turn around. Hands where I can see them. The rain tapped its little coat against the cruiser's hood. I watched from my car, lights off 2 houses down. You learn to read temperature at moments like this, the weather in a man's face. Marcus's jaw set, but his eyes slid to Ethan, then to Kane, then back again. He was calculating. He didn't like what the numbers said. Across the way, a sedan rolled to the curb and idled. The driver was an older man with a service cap tucked on the dash, camo ribbon sticker on the bumper. I've seen that look too. He wasn't rubbernecking. He was bearing witness. He held his phone up steady, the blue rectangle of the screen reflecting quicksilver rain. Kane clocked him and something mean flashed in those gray eyes. He didn't tell the man to leave. He just turned his body enough to block the lens and snapped the cuffs off his belt like punctuation. Hands behind your back, he said to Ethan. Ethan didn't argue. He moved slow enough to be respectful and fast enough to be safe. The cuffs clicked steel on steel, small and final. When Kane reached for Marcus, the tension snapped like a guitar string tuned a half step too high. You can't hold us without cause, Marcus said, voice low but not quiet. Kane leaned in just enough that the rain hid the rest of his expression. You already gave me cause, he said. You gave it when you didn't step out fast enough. That's the trick, you know. The kind of line that turns any motion into guilt and any pause into threat. It's a door you can't open without being accused of closing it. Officer, Ethan said, steady as a plumb line. We're cooperating. You're complying, Kane corrected. Don't confuse the two. Behind them, the cruiser's wipers scissored a metronome for the whole scene. The street was otherwise empty, just houses with their curtains drawn, porch lights sketching pale ovals on wet steps. The world had telescoped to four men and the rain that wouldn't stop. I heard another door somewhere. Miller, I'd learned later, the sergeant who shadowed Kane. He stayed back taking notes that weren't notes, eyes scanning for something he could call a weapon. There wasn't anything. Just a truck bed with a folded flag case and a pair of dress shoes in a box from the memorial. Kane's gaze hit the flag, skipped off like a stone, and never came back. Reasonable suspicion of firearms, Kane repeated like a mantra, like a magic phrase that could turn water to concrete. We'll search the vehicle at the station. At the station, Marcus said. He had that soldier's habit of making questions into statements. Kane didn't answer. He had his answers already. The older man in the sedan shifted, adjusting his angle, capturing it all. I could see his mouth tighten, but he didn't speak. Witnesses don't talk, they record. That's the agreement we've all made with our phones. We trade our voices for proof. Sir Ethan said just once, soft enough that only the rain and God could judge the tone. Not begging, bridging. Kane snapped the second cuff on Marcus's wrist. Face the car, he ordered, feet apart. Marcus did it, not because he was beaten, but because Ethan's hand had settled again on his shoulder with that quiet commander's weight. There's a rank that doesn't show on sleeves. Kane did a quick pat down, like he was searching for trouble, and expected to find it. He didn't. He grabbed Marcus's elbow and steered them both toward the cruiser. The red and blue lights rolled over their faces, painted them like actors in a play nobody asked to see. On the sidewalk, rain gathered in the seams of the concrete and leaked into the street. The city breathed slow and indifferent. Somewhere far off, a train horn mourned through the mist long and low. Name Kane said, though, he'd already taken their wallets. Procedure or the sound of power? Hard to tell sometimes. Ethan Ward, Ethan said. Marcus Hale. Marcus added each syllable squared away. Kane ushered them into the back seat, Ethan first. Marcus last, the doors swallowing them with that damp, heavy thunk you feel more than hear. He turned once more toward the truck, scanning, maybe waiting for the vehicle to volunteer a confession. It didn't. The crosstown breeze carried a hint of brine from the river and diesel from the docks. If you didn't know better, you might think it was just another Tuesday night with too much rain on it. The older veteran's phone stayed up recording. He wiped the lens with the corner of his sleeve and kept filming as the cruiser's lights smeared across the wet asphalt. He wasn't part of the story yet, but I'd seen enough to know that sometimes the smallest hinge swings the heaviest door. Kane slid behind the wheel. Miller took the passenger seat. The radio murmured something no one needed to hear. The siren didn't wail. It didn't need to. The cruiser pulled away, slow and hurried like a verdict. For a heartbeat, the street held its breath. Then the rain filled the space the men had left behind, washing the footprints into a forgettable dark. What remained were two wet arcs on the pavement where the cruiser's tires had stopped and started, and the long, smeared reflection of a streetlight that looked to me a lot like a fuse. I didn't know all the names then. I didn't know what would happen in that courtroom, who would step through those doors, or how heavy the truth would weigh when someone finally set it on the table. I only knew what I saw: two men who carried themselves like they were built for storms, and one officer who treated authority like a weapon you could swing any way you pleased. They drove off into the mist. The veteran lowered his phone and looked at the blank space where the cruiser had been. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. Behind them, the rain went on, and two shadows, broad-shouldered handcuffs, stretched long under the streetlight until the night swallowed them whole. That's how it began. With cuffs in the rain, a camera in a stranger's hand, and a question I couldn't shake about what kind of truth needs the dark to do its work. They took them down a hall that smelled like old cigarettes and wet concrete, the kind of smell that settles into your clothes and won't wash out. I followed as far as I could without making myself a problem, then waited by a narrow window set high in a cinder block wall. Through the wired glass, I could see a slice of the interview room, a metal table, two chairs bolted to the floor, fluorescent light stuttering like a tired heartbeat. Marcus couldn't sit. He paced a short loop that never changed: 3 strides forward, pivot 3 strides back, breathing through his nose, jaw clicking. Ethan sat, hands flat on the table, eyes on the door. He wasn't staring. He was measuring. You can tell the difference if you've been around men who've had to decide quickly whether to fight or fold. The door opened and Kane came in with Sergeant Miller at his shoulder. Miller looked like a line drawn with a ruler shirt pressed knife-sharp pen clipped at regulation height expression, so neat it was almost blank. Kane didn't take a seat. He anchored himself across the table, hands on the cold metal gray eyes, finding and holding Marcus like he could pin a storm to a map. "Let's save time," Kane said. "You assaulted a civilian outside Brandt's Tavern at 2200. You resisted a lawful stop. You may be involved in trafficking firearms." He let each charge drop into the room like a brick into a bucket. "Show the report," Ethan said. Calm. To the point. Kane's mouth moved, but not to smile. "Your medals won't save you here." It didn't sound like a threat. It sounded like a promise he'd made to himself. Marcus stopped pacing. "Name the civilian," he said. "Name them. Or this is theater." Miller finally spoke, voice tight as a drum. "You'll see everything when the paperwork clears." "That's funny," Marcus said. "We serve our country and suddenly paperwork needs time, but cuffs don't." Ethan cleared his throat just once, and Marcus's eyes flicked to him. The pacing started again, slower now. Ethan kept his hands flat, fingertips barely touching the table's edge. He looked like a man holding down a map in a crosswind. Kane slid a blank form toward them as if it were evidence. "We'll keep you overnight. You can make statements in the morning," Lawyer Ethan said. Miller shrugged. "You can call one when we process you." Pressure hung in the air, steady and invisible like altitude. I pressed my cheek to the wired glass to see more of the room, and that's when Officer Jenna Brooks slipped in behind them. 28 by the look of her uniform, knew enough to still have factory creases at the cuffs, a face that hadn't learned the trick of staying still. She closed the door with too much care, as if even metal had feelings. Her eyes touched each man and hesitated on Ethan. Officer Brooks, Kane said without looking. "Take notes." She nodded and pulled a small spiral notebook from her breast pocket. Her fingers shook. "It's a small thing, the tremor you see in a pen, but it's the only honest sound in rooms like that." Kane kept his line. "Walk me through what you did after leaving the VFW." "We drove," Ethan said. "Where to home?" "Which is where?" "Not here," Marcus said. Kane's eyes shifted to Marcus. "You think you're funny, sailor. I think I'm innocent." Kane's jaw tightened. He turned back to Ethan. "You stop anywhere, meet anyone, move anything." Ethan kept that quiet gaze on the door, as if he could see tomorrow through it. "We attended a memorial. We left. That's the whole story." Jenna's pen scratched once, then skittered, then fell. The notebook hit the floor with a flat slap. She bent too quickly to pick it up, and for a heartbeat, the page that faced the ceiling was visible through the glass, 3 words in block letters, written like a reminder you don't want to forget Crow shipment tonight. It wasn't a paragraph. It wasn't a plan. It was a fuse. Ethan's eyes went there. Not a full turn of the head, just the smallest angle change, but he saw it. I could tell he filed it the way a diver memorizes a shoreline, before dusk, one fixed point, to swim back to when the light goes. Jenna straightened, cheeks pink, and hugged the notebook tight to her chest. Kane didn't notice. Miller might have. He was built to notice. If he did, he kept it. "Here's your reality," Kane said. "You got loud with the wrong people at the wrong place. We have a witness. We have cause. You're here until we say otherwise." Marcus laughed once. No humor in it. "A witness you found in your pocket." "Careful," Miller said. "Your one remark from obstruction." Ethan leaned forward an inch. "Sergeant, with respect, will exercise our rights. We will not sign anything without counsel." Kane smiled then, and it was worse than his stare. "Counsel can hear the same charges in the morning." He rapped the table twice, knuckles as gavel, and moved to the door. The light overhead sputtered again, a tired insect trapped in plastic. When the door clicked shut, the room grew smaller by half. Marcus braced his hands on the back of the chair and bent his head. I could see the muscles in his neck stacked like rope. "They're going to bury us, Ethan." "Not if we don't help them," Ethan said. "That witness is a story they taught themselves to tell," Ethan said. "Stories break when the truth applies pressure." He said it like a man tying a knot, the kind you test and retest before you trust it. Jenna lingered by the door, notebook hugged to her ribs. She wasn't supposed to speak. You could see the rule in her posture. But she looked at Ethan the way people look at a lighthouse, like they're measuring the distance and the weather and their chances. Officer Ethan said softly, not quite a question, not quite a plea. She swallowed. "I'll get you water," she said, and left like the word was a secret that needed to get somewhere fast. Silence came back, not empty charge. The hum of the light filled it. The damp in the walls breathed it in and out. Marcus finally dropped into the chair. He stared at his cuffed hands like they were someone else's. "Your medals won't save you here," he repeated and gave the words back their weight. That's what he said. Ethan's eyes stayed on the door. "Medals never saved anyone," he said. "People do." He closed his eyes just once, and whatever memory rose to meet him came with a shadow. Later I'd learn it was a desert night, in a radio gone quiet, a promise made under a sky that didn't care. Fight for what's right, not shouted, whispered, a thread you wind around your wrist and refuse to cut. The door opened again. Kane stood there with 2 paper cups and a smirk, as if he'd heard what nobody said. He handed the water to Miller, who set them down on the table like they were evidence too. "Drink up," Kane said. "It's a long night." Marcus didn't touch his. Ethan did both hands one careful sip, as if he were buying himself a second of thought for the price of tap water. Then it happened, the sound that changes a room. Not a gunshot, not a shout. Just the flat palm of Marcus's hand cracking the table. "You can't hold us without cause," he said. "Not to argue, to announce." The chair skittered 2 inches, metal legs squealing. The fluorescents buzzed like hornets. Through the glass, the note hit my ribs before it reached my ears. It wasn't rage without aim. It was a drum calling the line to form. Kane didn't flinch. He let the echo run its course along the cinder block and die in the vents. Then he leaned in close enough that the cheap coffee on his breath competed with the stale smoke. "Watch me," he said. He left the cups on the table, the door yawning open behind him. Miller followed, professional to the bone eyes, giving nothing away. Jenna's shadow passed in the hall, small and quick. The door shut. The lock turned. The light stuttered, caught itself, and hummed on. From my side of the glass, I could see the shape of the night settling in heavy damp, uninvited. Ethan rolled his shoulders once like a man loosening a knot under the skin, then lifted his eyes to the corner where the camera lens blinked its red dot every 3 seconds. Marcus breathed long in long out shoulders, rising and falling until the rhythm matched the hum of the light. I've seen storms gather. They don't always start with thunder. Sometimes they begin with a hand on a table, a word you can't swallow, and the quiet decision not to break before daylight does. I could feel the air change when Victor Kane stepped out of the interview room. The door shut with a slow click, the kind that tries to sound ordinary but lands heavy. Through a narrow hallway window, I caught a glimpse of him leaning against the wall, the glow of his phone lighting his face from below. Rain drummed on the roof, steady as a ticking clock. He spoke in a low-clipped rhythm. "Crow, it's done. I've got them sitting tight. 2 Navy SEALs. They won't see daylight until morning. You've got clear water for the shipment tonight." A pause. Then softer, almost pleased, from Wilmington to the Sound. "No eyes on it. We're good." Raymond Crow. The name alone carried a smell of smoke and hidden money. I'd heard of him, owner of backroom gambling dens, a man who knew which port official could be bought and which one could simply vanish. To hear Kane say shipment left no doubt. This wasn't a routine arrest. It was cover. Kane ended the call and slid the phone back into his jacket as if he'd just ordered a pizza. He straightened his collar, smoothed his face, and for a moment looked like any other weary cop on night duty. Only the flat glitter in his eyes gave him away. What Kane didn't know was that Officer Jenna Brooks had stepped into the hallway a breath too early. She froze just around the corner, hidden by a filing cabinet, listening to every word. I could see her shadow against the frosted glass stiff shoulders, one hand clamped over her mouth. The faint scrape of her boots betrayed a heart racing faster than good sense. Her father had been a mechanic wrongfully arrested when she was a teenager. He lost a year of his life to a false charge before a quiet retraction cleared him. That memory lived in her like a scar under the skin. Tonight it pulsed. Every word Kane spoke landed like a hammer on that old wound. Back inside the interview room, the hours stretched thin. The light buzzed. Condensation crawled down the cinder block walls. Marcus Hale finally gave up pacing. He let his weight fall into the metal chair with a clatter and dropped his head into his hands. "They'll bury us before the truth comes out," he said, his voice rough from hours of dry air and swallowed rage. Ethan Ward sat across from him, still and deliberate. He didn't look at Marcus right away. Instead, he studied the camera lens in the corner, the faint red blink keeping time with his breathing. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet enough to make the room lean closer. "Truth works quietly," he said, "but it never misses." It wasn't comfort. It was a promise carved from experience, a promise that didn't need volume to carry weight. Marcus lifted his head. Something in his eyes steadied like a rope catching on a cleat. Beyond those walls, the world began to stir. That veteran with the phone, the man who'd filmed the roadside arrest, had already uploaded his video to a closed forum for former service members. A caption with just 3 words, 2 seals taken. In less than an hour, the clip started to ripple outward. Veterans shared it. Reporters lurking for late-night stories caught its scent. No one in that damp room knew it yet, but the fuse had been lit. Back in the hallway, Jenna pressed herself tighter into the shadow. Kane passed her on his way back to the interview room, phone now silent. He didn't see the way she stiffened, didn't hear the breath she held. But her eyes followed him wide and sharp, already weighing what one act of courage might cost and what it might save. Inside, Marcus sat straighter still, staring at Ethan. The hum of the fluorescent light returned to its steady pulse, but the atmosphere had shifted. The night was no longer just theirs to endure. Somewhere out in the wet darkness, truth was moving quietly, invisibly, and with the certainty of a tide no wall can hold. By the time midnight rolled past, the story had already slipped beyond the walls of that police station. The first ripple came from a place no one inside could see, the veteran in the sedan who had filmed the roadside stop. He uploaded the clip to a private forum for former service members with a simple caption, "2 seals cuffed in the rain." Within minutes, the video jumped fences. Screens lit up from Wilmington to Norfolk, passed from veteran to veteran, then out to military families, then to the wider web. But what traveled fastest wasn't the truth. Someone edited the footage, cut the opening moments, slowed a push of Marcus's shoulder spliced in audio from another night. The headline that took off like a firework read, "Decorated SEALs Attack Civilian Outside Tavern." The lie spread with the speed of anger. Local blogs swallowed it whole. A late-night radio host called them rogue operators. By 1 a.m., hashtags were already trending. People wanted a villain before they wanted a fact. Far from that storm of rumor, Chief Petty Officer Logan Pierce was settling in after a long watch aboard a destroyer docked in Norfolk. He and Ethan had shared a deployment in the Gulf, and their bond was the kind you don't need to explain. When the link to the raw, unedited video hit his encrypted message queue, he clicked without hesitation. Logan watched the clean footage twice, jaw tightening. No fight, no provocation, just a hard stop and a pair of cuffs. He didn't waste time. Pulling a secure handset, he contacted the Naval Special Warfare Command and sent the file with a brief note, "Urgent. Possible wrongful arrest of SEALs Warden Hale. Request immediate flag-level review." The duty officer on the night watch, a commander known for moving fast when the stakes were high, confirmed receipt and added a line that would matter later, forwarding to Admiral Jonathan Reeves. That single sentence started a chain of phone calls that would stretch from a quiet pier in Norfolk to a locked office in D.C. before sunrise. Back inside the interrogation room, the night dragged in slow motion. The fluorescent light still pulsed with its tired hum. Marcus had worn a groove in the narrow floor, but finally dropped into the chair opposite Ethan. He rubbed the back of his neck, a faint, crooked grin appearing where none belonged. "Remember when we thought combat was stressful?" he said, half laugh, half exhale. For the first time all night, Ethan's face softened. A quiet chuckle escaped him, small, almost private. Then he let silence return. It wasn't awkward. It was a pause with weight like the kind you take before giving an order you know can't be taken back. But silence can only hold so much. Marcus stared at the tabletop, at the faint rings left by paper cups, and let the darker thought out. Maybe justice is just a word, he said almost to himself. Ethan lifted his gaze and met Marcus's eyes until Marcus had to look up. Or maybe he said, voice steady and low, "It's a fight we can't afford to lose." The words didn't bounce. They settled the way a dropped anchor finds bottom. Marcus exhaled a slow, measured breath that belonged more to a soldier than a prisoner. Outside the damp room, the larger world was catching up. In newsrooms across the region, phones buzzed with alerts as uncut footage still carrying the veteran's timestamp began to surface and challenge the doctored clips. Editors argued in quick whispers about verification and liability. Somewhere in that shuffle, a Wilmington news producer made the call to run a late segment. At 3:17 a.m., a red-eyed anchor faced a camera and said the words that shifted the timeline. Breaking overnight. A Wilmington judge has signed an emergency order to hold a preliminary hearing at 9 a.m. today. Two Navy SEALs remain in custody following a disputed arrest. New video is raising serious questions about what really happened. The announcement slid across the bottom of televisions in diners and truck stops into living rooms where veterans sat up straight into the phone of Admiral Reeves as he reviewed the alert sent from Naval Command. It was a short sentence on a late-night scroll, but it landed like a starting gun. Back in the room with the blinking camera, Ethan didn't know the exact shape of the movement outside, but he sensed it. Maybe it was the change in the hallway's footsteps. Maybe the faint buzz of phones beyond the wall. He glanced at Marcus and gave the smallest nod as if to say, "We're not alone anymore." The rain had eased to a mist by then, but the air inside still carried that damp charge. The night wasn't over. The hard part hadn't even begun. Yet a current had shifted. Somewhere beyond the cinder blocks and the locked door, truth had found a way to breathe. And for the first time since the cuffs snapped shut in the rain, the fight no longer felt like two men against a city. It felt like the start of something larger, a tide moving quietly toward morning. Morning came gray and heavy, the kind of morning when the clouds hang low enough to brush the courthouse roof. By 8 o'clock, the steps were already crowded, reporters elbowing for camera angles, veterans standing shoulder to shoulder in quiet solidarity, and townspeople craning their necks to glimpse the two Navy men at the center of the storm. You could taste the tension in the air, thick as wet wool. Inside, the courtroom felt even tighter. Every seat was taken. The walls, paneled in old oak, seemed to pull the sound inward. Even the shuffle of feet echoed too loud. At the front, Judge Eleanor Grant, a woman with a reputation for discipline and an eye for small truths, adjusted her glasses and scanned the room with a look that said, "No nonsense would survive here, at least not for long." The door at the side opened, and Ethan Ward and Marcus Hale entered between two deputies. No chains on their ankles, but the weight of suspicion hung like an extra set of cuffs. They carried themselves like men used to standing inspection heads, level steps measured. Some in the gallery murmured. A few veterans raised a subtle hand to the brow, a silent salute that cut through the whispers. Then Claire Dempsey rose. At 40, she was sharp-featured and precise, the kind of prosecutor who could turn a comma into a weapon. Her dark suit was crisp, her binder thicker than a brick. But behind the steel of her voice, you could almost hear the political pressure pushing every word forward. "Your Honor," she began, "the state presents serious charges against these defendants. Aggravated assault on a civilian resisting lawful detention and suspicion of trafficking restricted firearms. The evidence is clear and compelling." She laid out her story like a map drawn in ink. According to a so-called eyewitness, the two SEALs left a memorial late at night, picked a fight with a man outside Brandt's Tavern, and when police intervened, they resisted violently. Each claim hung in the air with practiced precision. And then she raised the stakes. "We will show," she said, "that these defendants decorated, though they maybe used their training to intimidate and injure a civilian. Their status does not place them above the law. It was a performance designed to close every door before the defense could open one." Papers rustled in the gallery. Pens scribbled in the press row. I watched Ethan and Marcus closely. Ethan kept his gaze on the judge, unreadable. Marcus's jaw flexed muscle tight like a drawn bow. Toward the back of the room, Victor Kane sat with the easy arrogance of someone who believed the script would go his way. Every few minutes he exchanged a glance with Raymond Crowe, who had slipped into a corner seat in a dark suit, his tie a little too perfect. The two men barely moved, but their eyes spoke a language of silent confirmation. "It's holding. For now." The prosecution called no witnesses yet. This was the opening volley, and Dempsey delivered it with the confidence of someone who thought she already owned the verdict. She closed her binder with a soft thud that sounded like a gavel. That's when the room shifted. Marcus shot to his feet so fast the deputy beside him startled. His voice filled the chamber, strong enough to bounce off the carved beams overhead. "We fought for this nation," he said, each word clipped and certain. "We deserve the truth, not this circus." The silence that followed was almost physical. Then the gallery erupted, gasps, scattered applause, a low rumble of outrage and admiration mixed together. Reporters leaned forward, pens flying. Judge Grant banged her gavel hard enough to leave dents. Order, she barked, but even she seemed to let the echo of Marcus's words hang a second longer than needed. Ethan remained seated, eyes steady on the judge, a quiet counterweight to Marcus's fire. The two of them in that single moment looked less like defendants and more like men standing a post together. And then, almost hidden in the commotion, a small but crucial thing happened. Officer Jenna Brooks slipped through the side entrance and stood just inside the doorway. Her uniform looked a shade too big, her hands clasped tight, but her eyes were fixed on Ethan. Just a glance, quick, deliberate, and full of meaning. It wasn't random. It was a message only he could read. "I'm moving. I'm bringing the truth with me." The judge's gavel fell again, bringing the room to a brittle quiet. Claire Dempsey gathered her papers with the careful movements of someone who knew a single slip might give away more than she wanted. Kane leaned back in his chair, but the easy confidence from earlier flickered for just an instant, like a light catching a crack in the wall. The morning session broke a few minutes later, but no one left unchanged. The charges still stood heavy as the rain clouds outside, yet something had shifted beneath the surface. The state's neat story had met its first real resistance, not in cross-examination, but in the unfiltered force of a soldier's voice and the silent vow of an honest cop watching from the shadows. I sat there as the crowd murmured, and the news cameras blinked red, and I couldn't shake the sense that the day had only begun to reveal what it held. Somewhere beyond the courthouse doors, bigger wheels were already turning, and inside, truth had just taken its first audible breath. By mid-morning, the courtroom felt smaller, as if the air itself had thickened. Reporters leaned forward with pens poised, and every shuffle of paper seemed to echo. When David Mercer, the defense attorney, finally rose, the room quieted the way a field goes silent before a storm. Mercer wasn't flashy. At 42, he had a calm, deliberate presence, the kind that draws attention without ever asking for it. He adjusted his tie, once opened a slim leather folder, and spoke in a voice that carried steady and clear. "Your Honor, the defense submits verified street camera footage from Market and fourth time stamped, the moment of the alleged assault. It shows both defendants driving several blocks away from the tavern. They were never at the scene of the supposed attack." A deputy wheeled a monitor forward. Grainy video lit the screen, Ethan's truck gliding past an intersection miles from the bar, its taillights reflected in rain-slick asphalt. Date and time stamped in the corner. Mercer let the evidence breathe, letting each frame cut a hole in the prosecution's story. Judge Grant leaned forward, reading the timestamp twice. Murmurs rolled through the gallery like a low tide. Marcus straightened in his seat, a flicker of relief crossing his face before discipline pulled it back. Ethan watched the judge, not the screen, eyes steady, measuring the room. Claire Dempsey rose slowly, lips pressed thin. "Your Honor," she said, "we expected this. The state will show that the defendants doubled back after this footage and confronted a civilian. We have an eyewitness prepared to testify." The side door opened. A man in a worn jacket entered, moving with the careful steps of someone who had rehearsed each one. He took the stand, swore the oath, and began a detailed account of a brawl outside Brandt's Tavern. Voices raised, fists flying, two men matching the SEALs building clothing. His words were clean practiced, almost too neat. From my seat, I could feel Ethan's attention sharpen like a lens focusing. He leaned just enough to catch every detail. Something about the witness's rhythm set off an internal clock of his own. Mercer began his cross-examination. "Sir, at what time did you see this altercation?" The witness cleared his throat. "Around 10:20, and you're certain of that?" "Yes." Mercer nodded, nothing more. Ethan's brow tightened a fraction. I saw his hand move under the table, tracing an invisible pattern, as if he were mapping the night in his mind. The testimony droned on claims of shouting, of blows exchanged. Through it all, Victor Kane sat in the gallery like a man watching a play he'd written. Twice he glanced toward Raymond Crowe, who remained a still silhouette near the back. Kane's mouth curved in a thin smile, and at one point he lifted his chin in the faintest nod, an unspoken toast to a script unfolding as planned. The look landed on Marcus like a dare. Marcus gripped the edge of the defense table. His knuckles went white. I could almost feel the charge of his restraint. Then Ethan leaned closer, whispering just loud enough for Mercer to hear. Ask for phone records. His timeline's off. Mercer pivoted. Sir, he said to the witness, do you carry a smartphone? Yes. And you had it with you that night? Yes. Would you be willing to provide your location data to confirm your timeline? The witness blinked. I don't have that information, Strange Mercer said evenly, because the subpoenaed records we obtained this morning show your phone inside a warehouse district 3 miles from Brant's at 10:20. He let the silence stretch. Can you explain that? The man shifted words collapsing into half-formed sounds. Dempsey objected, but the judge overruled with a curt motion. A rustle of surprise moved through the gallery like wind through dry grass. Kane's smirk twitched, but he didn't drop it. Instead, he crossed one leg over the other and gave Crow a glance that said, hold steady. Crow's eyes stayed flat, unreadable. And then, as if the room itself wanted another spark, a phone rang from the press benches. A reporter snatched it up, listened, and hissed a whisper to the next seat. Within seconds, half a dozen phones glowed blue. The buzz thickened until Judge Grant's gavel cracked for silence. A reporter stood voice tight with urgency. Your Honor, breaking alert, local news is reporting a Wilmington port shipment missing from customs inventory. Authorities suspect stolen military-grade weapons. The gallery erupted. Gasps hurried, typing the low thrum of disbelief. Even seasoned deputies glanced at each other. The words military-grade weapons hung in the air like smoke from a sudden fire. For a long beat, the judge let the room settle. Then she turned to the witness, still sweating under cross-examination. You may step down, she said, the weight of suspicion shifting without a single added sentence. From where I sat, it felt like the ground had tilted. The prosecution's neat story was cracking along several lines at once. An alibi on camera, a witness pinned by his own phone, and now a missing shipment that whispered of a bigger crime. Kane kept the faintest trace of a smile, but his eyes had gone cold, calculating. Marcus caught the look and nearly rose, but Ethan's steady hand on his arm held him in place. Sometimes restraint can be louder than a shout. The hearing paused for a recess, but no one in that courtroom mistook the break for calm. Outside, sirens began to rise across the city as the news of stolen weapons spread. Inside, the storm had only just begun. Night pressed hard against the courthouse windows, heavy with mist off the Cape Fear River. The crowds were gone now, the hallways hushed except for the slow squeak of a night deputy's shoes. In a small office above the holding cells, Officer Jenna Brooks sat alone beneath the glow of a single desk lamp. Papers, untouched thoughts, anything but still. She tried to lose herself in routine reports, but the images from the day would not let go. She saw Ethan Ward again, steady, unflinching, while the prosecution twisted the truth. She heard Marcus Hale's voice rising. We deserve the truth, not this circus. And beneath those fresh memories pulsed an older wound, the day her father was led from their home in handcuffs for a crime he hadn't committed. 14-year-old Jenna had watched from behind a doorway as neighbors whispered and a cruiser carried her father away. Though charges were later dropped, he never recovered the easy laugh he once had. That scar never faded. Tonight it throbbed. She stood and paced the narrow room, heart pounding like a second clock. Silence or action, each step argued with the next. If she stayed quiet, her badge and career would remain safe. If she spoke, she might lose everything: her job, her safety, maybe even her life. Yet the memory of her father's bowed shoulders and Ethan's calm eyes kept pushing back. Courage, she realized, sometimes begins when fear refuses to leave. Her heart decided first. Moving quickly but carefully, Jenna locked the door and sat at her computer. She navigated to the department's internal camera archive and scrolled until the timestamp matched what she'd overheard in the hall. There it was, Victor Kane, half hidden in a dim corridor, accepting a thick envelope from Raymond Crow and tucking it into his jacket with a furtive glance. No audio, no captions, but the image spoke plainly enough. Hands trembling, she cued the clip for export. A progress bar crawled across the screen, each percentage a small eternity. She kept one eye on the frosted window, listening for footsteps. The bar hit 100%. She slipped the drive free and cleared every trace of her access, her fingers steadier now than she would have believed. But evidence alone meant nothing if it stayed locked inside her pocket. She opened an encrypted email client she'd once learned about in a cybersecurity seminar and attached the file. Her message was short and direct. For immediate review, proof of corruption tied to Navy SEAL arrest, Wilmington PD. The recipient was Naval Special Warfare Command, the same command already alerted by Chief Petty Officer Logan Pierce. She hesitated only long enough to feel the weight of what she was doing. Then she pressed send and watched the message disappear into the dark. Downstairs, the night stretched like a low tide. Inside their cell, Marcus sat hunched on the bench, elbows braced on his knees, eyes fixed on the concrete floor. The fight in court had taken more out of him than he wanted to admit. His voice, when it came, was rough and low. Maybe justice really is just a word, he said. Across from him, Ethan lifted his head. For a moment, he simply studied his friend as if weighing each breath. Then he crossed the cell and laid a steady hand on Marcus's shoulder, a quiet weight that said more than any speech. Then we'll be the ones to give it meaning, he said. The words didn't echo like a slogan. They settled like a vow. Marcus inhaled slowly, the tightness in his shoulders easing, and gave a small nod that carried more resolve than a dozen shouted promises. Above them, Jenna shut down her computer and switched off the lamp. She slipped the drive into her coat pocket and left the office as silently as she had entered. The hall smelled faintly of cold metal and rain. Somewhere beyond the courthouse walls, an email was already traveling through secure channels toward the desk of Admiral Jonathan Reeves. None of them could yet know how close that evidence was to changing everything. But you could feel the shift, subtle and certain, like the scent of salt water before a tide turns. The long night still held its shadows, yet a hidden current of truth was already moving unstoppable now toward the light of morning. Morning light cut through the courthouse windows in long gray stripes. The air inside the packed courtroom felt charged like the breath before a thunderclap. Judge Eleanor Grant had returned to the bench, and every reporter leaned forward, pens poised. Across the aisle, Claire Dempsey organized her closing notes, ready to lock the case before lunch. You could sense the crowd holding its breath as she stepped to the podium. She cleared her throat and began the cadence of final arguments, steady and rehearsed. Your Honor, the state maintains the heavy oak doors at the back of the chamber slammed open. The sound cracked through the room like a rifle shot. All heads turned. Through the doorway strode Admiral Jonathan Reeves, 60 years old, silver hair close cropped. He wore a sharply pressed navy dress uniform, dark as midnight. Service ribbons glinted against his chest, and the gold of a SEAL trident caught every shaft of light. Each footstep on the marble floor landed with the measured weight of a drumbeat. Conversations died mid-sentence. Even the building seemed to stand at attention. Reeves didn't rush. He advanced down the center aisle, like a man carrying both authority and purpose, salutes following him like ripples in a wake. 2 uniformed aides moved behind him, but he needed no escort. The silence deepened until the only sound was the echo of his shoes and the low hiss of camera shutters trying not to break the spell. Claire Dempsey froze, mid-sentence, eyes wide, words evaporating. Judge Grant tilted slightly forward, her normally steady hand resting on the bench as if to gauge the shift in the room. On the back row, Victor Kane's smirk collapsed. Color drained from his face, leaving the gray of cold stone. A bead of sweat traced a quick path from his temple to his collar. Beside him, Raymond Crowe stiffened, calculating exits that no longer existed. Reeves reached the center of the well, stopped, and offered a crisp nod to the judge. Your Honor, he said, his voice carrying like a ship's bell. I request the court's permission to address these proceedings on behalf of the United States Navy. Judge Grant hesitated only a heartbeat before answering granted. The Admiral stepped forward and placed a thick folder on the evidence table. This morning, my office received authenticated material relevant to this case, he began. I am here to ensure the truth is recorded in full. He opened the folder with deliberate calm. The first exhibit, GPS navigation logs from the defendant's truck, drawn directly from encrypted military tracking. The timestamps matched the footage already presented by the defense, proof that Ethan Ward and Marcus Hale were miles from the alleged fight at the exact hour in question. Next came a second piece, an internal video recording from Wilmington police servers. Reeves explained how the clip, forwarded anonymously but verified, showed Victor Kane meeting with Raymond Crowe in a dark corridor, an envelope of cash changing hands. The screen came alive on a nearby monitor. There was no sound, but none was needed. The movement of the handoff and Kane's glance over his shoulder told a story too precise to mistake. A murmur rolled through the courtroom. Reporters scrambled for every angle. Veterans in the gallery straightened in their seats as if bracing against a sudden wind. Reeves didn't pause. He held up a third document, encrypted message logs retrieved through federal warrants and Navy cyber operations linking Kane and Crow to a scheduled weapons shipment routed through Wilmington's docks. The logs laid out not just intent, but coordination timelines, false manifests, even payment schedules. Judge Grant's eyes narrowed as she read the highlighted lines. Claire Dempsey's hands tightened around her legal pad until the cardboard bent. The Admiral turned to face the bench squarely. "Your Honor, these men," he said, motioning to Ethan and Marcus, "were never suspects. They were targets. Their arrest was engineered to clear a path for an illegal arms deal. They honored their duty when the nation called. Today I stand here because that duty doesn't end when the uniform comes off." Then he straightened his voice, dropping into the deep calm of command. "These men answered when the nation called. Today I answer for them." The words settled over the room like a command you could feel in your bones. No one moved. Cameras stopped clicking. For a long breath, the only sound was the quiet hum of the overhead lights and the soft creak of the judge's chair as she leaned forward. From the defense table, Ethan met Marcus's eyes. No smile, just a slow, steady nod. Around them, veterans rose to their feet in silence, a salute of respect that needed no permission. Even the skeptical journalists lowered their pens, caught in the weight of the moment. Kane tried to speak an inarticulate sound that never reached a full word. Crow's jaw worked but found no answer. Every plan they had built through backroom deals and forged testimony now lay exposed, undone by the evidence on the table and the man who had brought it. Judge Grant let the silence hold until it felt almost sacred. Then she spoke, each word deliberate. "This court will recess briefly to review the submitted evidence. No one leaves this room." The gavel fell sharp and final, but everyone knew the balance had already shifted. The tide of the trial had turned in a single measured walk from the back of the room to the bench, a walk that carried the weight of truth and the quiet authority of a man who came when justice called. The courtroom returned from recess charged with a strange stillness, the kind that hums in your bones before a verdict is spoken. Judge Eleanor Grant stepped back onto the bench, her black robe absorbing the morning light. She carried a stack of freshly reviewed documents, the GPS logs, the hidden camera footage, the encrypted messages Admiral Reeves had delivered. No one needed to be told the air had shifted. You could feel it. Claire Dempsey stood at the prosecution table, but the steel that had marked her earlier arguments was gone. Her fingers trembled as she gripped the lectern. "Your Honor," she began, her voice catching on the first word. She tried again, softer. "The state withdraws its complaint." A quick breath, almost a gasp. "The evidence presented shows that key testimony was false. We cannot in good faith proceed." It wasn't just a legal concession, it was an admission that the scaffolding of the case had collapsed. Judge Grant's eyes sharpened. "Are you also acknowledging the introduction of falsified evidence?" she asked. Dempsey swallowed hard. "Yes, Your Honor. The witness statement and supporting documents appear to have been fabricated. I have already referred these matters for investigation." The words left her lips with the weight of surrender. Around her, reporters scrambled to capture every syllable. On the back row, Victor Kane could no longer sit still. His face was chalk white, the easy smirk long gone. Suddenly, he sprang to his feet, voice breaking into the silence like shattered glass. "This is a setup," he shouted, pointing a shaking finger toward Admiral Reeves. "A Navy stunt to cover their own crimes." The outburst echoed but carried no force. His words came out uneven, tripping over one another. They planted. The rest dissolved into a hoarse stammer. The confidence that had carried him through every crooked deal now abandoned him completely. Judge Grant didn't flinch. "Sit down, Mr. Kane," she said, her voice a blade of cold authority. When he kept sputtering, deputies moved in a wall of uniforms closing around him. Raymond Crow, who had remained silent all morning, tried to edge backward toward the side door, but another deputy stepped neatly into his path. "This court finds," Judge Grant continued, each word measured, "that the charges against Ethan Ward and Marcus Hale are without merit and were built on knowingly falsified evidence. The case is dismissed in full." Furthermore, based on the material entered today, this court orders the immediate arrest of Victor Kane and Raymond Crowe for conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and trafficking in illegal weapons. The gavel cracked down once, a sound so sharp it seemed to slice the tension in the room. What followed was a single beat of profound silence, a deep collective breath as the meaning sank in. Ethan turned to Marcus. For a moment they simply looked at each other, no words needed. A small nod passed between them, acknowledgement, relief, and something larger than triumph. It wasn't victory for pride's sake. It was vindication for the truth they had carried through every hour of darkness. Then the room erupted. It began as a scatter of applause from the gallery and swelled into a roar that filled the chamber. Veterans rose, some saluting, others clapping with tears in their eyes. Reporters shouted into phones. Even the stern bailiffs allowed themselves the hint of a smile. The sound wasn't just noise. It was release, the collective letting go of fear, and outrage, the sound of justice finally exhaling. Kane sagged between two deputies, the fight gone from his frame. Crowe's face had turned the color of wet ash. The same men who had orchestrated a night of lies now stood powerless as cameras flashed and pens scratched history into permanence. Through it all, Ethan and Marcus remained composed. They rose when the judge dismissed them, straight-backed and calm, as if they were simply standing a final watch. The applause swelled again as they turned toward the exit, their quiet dignity saying more than any speech could. Justice had spoken, clear, undeniable, and for once loud enough for everyone to hear. The courtroom returned from recess charged with a strange stillness, the kind that hums in your bones before a verdict is spoken. Judge Eleanor Grant stepped back onto the bench, her black robe absorbing the morning light. She carried a stack of freshly reviewed documents, the GPS logs, the hidden camera footage, the encrypted messages Admiral Reeves had delivered. No one needed to be told the air had shifted. You could feel it. Claire Dempsey stood at the prosecution table, but the steel that had marked her earlier arguments was gone. Her fingers trembled as she gripped the lectern. "Your Honor," she began, her voice catching on the first word. She tried again, softer. "The state withdraws its complaint." A quick breath, almost a gasp. "The evidence presented shows that key testimony was false. We cannot in good faith proceed." It wasn't just a legal concession, it was an admission that the scaffolding of the case had collapsed. Judge Grant's eyes sharpened. "Are you also acknowledging the introduction of falsified evidence?" she asked. Dempsey swallowed hard. "Yes, Your Honor. The witness statement and supporting documents appear to have been fabricated. I have already referred these matters for investigation." The words left her lips with the weight of surrender. Around her, reporters scrambled to capture every syllable. On the back row, Victor Kane could no longer sit still. His face was chalk white, the easy smirk long gone. Suddenly, he sprang to his feet, voice breaking into the silence like shattered glass. "This is a setup," he shouted, pointing a shaking finger toward Admiral Reeves. "A Navy stunt to cover their own crimes." The outburst echoed but carried no force. His words came out uneven, tripping over one another. They planted." The rest dissolved into a hoarse stammer. The confidence that had carried him through every crooked deal now abandoned him completely. Judge Grant didn't flinch. "Sit down, Mr. Kane," she said, her voice a blade of cold authority. When he kept sputtering, deputies moved in a wall of uniforms, closing around him. Raymond Crowe, who had remained silent all morning, tried to edge backward toward the side door, but another deputy stepped neatly into his path. "This court finds," Judge Grant continued, each word measured, "that the charges against Ethan Ward and Marcus Hale are without merit and were built on knowingly falsified evidence. The case is dismissed in full." Furthermore, based on the material entered today, this court orders the immediate arrest of Victor Kane and Raymond Crowe for conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and trafficking in illegal weapons. The gavel cracked down once, a sound so sharp it seemed to slice the tension in the room. What followed was a single beat of profound silence, a deep collective breath as the meaning sank in. Ethan turned to Marcus. For a moment they simply looked at each other, no words needed. A small nod passed between them, acknowledgement, relief, and something larger than triumph. It wasn't victory for pride's sake, it was vindication for the truth they had carried through every hour of darkness. Then the room erupted. It began as a scatter of applause from the gallery, and swelled into a roar that filled the chamber. Veterans rose, some saluting others, clapping with tears in their eyes. Reporters shouted into phones. Even the stern bailiffs allowed themselves the hint of a smile. The sound wasn't just noise. It was release, the collective letting go of fear and outrage, the sound of justice finally exhaling. Kane sagged between two deputies, the fight gone from his frame. Crow's face had turned the color of wet ash. The same men who had orchestrated a night of lies now stood powerless as cameras flashed and pens scratched history into permanence. Through it all, Ethan and Marcus remained composed. They rose when the judge dismissed them, straight-backed and calm, as if they were simply standing a final watch. The applause swelled again as they turned toward the exit, their quiet dignity saying more than any speech could. Justice had spoken clear, undeniable, and for once loud enough for everyone to hear. What a journey this has been, proof that courage and integrity can outlast corruption and fear. Ethan and Marcus never wavered, and Admiral Reeves showed us that real justice may move quietly, but it never misses. Their story reminds us that truth and honor are worth standing up for, no matter how heavy the night feels. If this story inspired you, please like this video and share it with friends and family so others can feel the strength of standing for what's right. And don't forget to subscribe to Mr. Mac's Stories for more powerful, true-to-life tales that celebrate justice, resilience, and hope. Your support means more than you know. It fuels our team to keep creating meaningful stories that shine a light where it's needed most. From all of us at Mr. Mac's Stories, thank you for being part of this mission.